So now coming to the really interesting stuff, I'm very honored to host the public-private collaboration to advance blockchain in new mobility panel. So whilst we are building up the chairs in here, I'm very pleased to introduce at first Irene Adamski, Blockchain Advisory Board at OECD, Secretary General at Bundesblock and Co-Chair Energy Working Group in Nachbarn. Irene, welcome to the stage. And second, Andreas Hartl, Head of Division Strategy AI, Data Economic and Blockchain at Federal Ministry of Economic Affairs and Energy. Welcome on the stage as well. Lukas Repa, Senior Policy Officer for Digital Innovation and Blockchain, so-called Unit F3 of the European Commission. Hi, Lukas. Florian Glatz, founding president of Bundesblock and founding member of Nachbarn. Florian Glatz, here you are. Welcome on stage. Markus Olczok, head of Car Trust, Koschke Group company, started 2011 on blockchain development and is still a critical supporter. So I'm very curious about the critical supporter. Nice to meet you on stage. And last but not least, Vincent Schlatt, a research associate at Fraunhofer Institute for Applied Information Technology, FIT, and part of the FIT Blockchain Lab. Welcome and board. Okay, have a seat, please. There are microphones on there. If you're thirsty, feel free to grab water. And for a little warm-up, I start with a very general question to all of you, and I ask you for a brief answer. Why are you considering the topic of blockchain in the field of new mobility to be relevant, starting from left to the right order?
Thank you very much. I believe that moving forward in the 21st century, the entire idea of the Internet of Things and the economy of things is going to be very, very much the driving factor about increasing and maintaining our standards and quality of life. And basically mobility, it was mentioned in the beginning by Christoph, is the driving factor there. And DLT and blockchain is going to enable that. So that's why I think it's going to be important.
Thank you. Not really anything substantial to add. So I think the bottom line is that mobility is decentral, and blockchain or DLTs are decentralized systems. So I think that's a perfect match to organize things.
European Commission, yeah, I think that cars are driving computers nowadays. So cars will produce masses of data, and for data to be trusted, blockchain is a key enabler, and this is why we believe the mobility sector is one of the sectors where blockchain really has a great potential.
Maybe to add another perspective would be that mobility, particularly for Germany, is an extremely important economic sector, and it seems that we're somehow behind a bit when it comes to innovation with electric vehicles and alternative forms of propulsion. So I think that putting blockchain innovation around mobility, making that one of the focus points in Germany, could potentially give us a head start in another area that is relevant.
I think when we're talking about new mobility, we are always talking about identities. So we're talking about natural persons as well as companies, as well as IoT devices, in this case vehicles. So when it comes to identity, the question is who owns the identity, or in this case, who owns the vehicle, who is authorized to act on behalf of this vehicle. So from my point of view, when it comes to the combination of emerging ecosystems in this case, blockchain really fits there, because we don't have only one partner or one provider of services. In this case, we have a couple, and therefore the blockchain ecosystem is the best fit for it.
So I think that blockchain systems themselves require collaboration to function, and I think that implementing blockchain solutions also fosters collaboration on other levels, also on organizational levels. So I think that is why it's important for mobility as well, because functioning mobility sector requires collaboration of different players and actors. And the second thing is, even though it might not be the core technology for other solutions which are important in the mobility sector, such as identity management, it can be of great advantage, and it also fosters research and stuff on topics like self-sovereign identity, which can be of great advantage in my opinion.
Thank you, Vincent. First question I would ask you to come from a research perspective in the middle into the spotlight, out of the shadow. And then the second question, more relevant. Vincent, to you as well, from Fraunhofer perspective, blockchain is always accused of not really being ready for use in today's setup. Because, for example, it's legally not mature. What would you reply from a Fraunhofer perspective against the background that you even wrote a report for the German government?
Well, I think that blockchain as a technology is ready, depending on what sort of use case you actually want to realize as a technology itself. But there are a couple of aspects that you need to consider. For example, legal aspects. So we were talking about platooning earlier, which is a use case that we've been looking at for the Federal Ministry of Transport. And we think that for platooning, the technology is already there in terms of blockchain technology, but there are a couple of legal aspects that you need to consider. For example, in the platooning case, I think our legal experts considered that you would need to change 4 different legal frameworks for it to function in a certain setting, and I think that is where it's still lacking. Also, you need to consider things like privacy. You also need to consider the legal connection of the actors in the blockchain network and stuff like that, which is already being researched, but is not yet really mature. So I think this is one of the main hindrances that one considers.
Lucas and Andreas, taking directly those points, what will or has to come internationally and nationally, so from German perspective and European perspective, on a supranational level, for example, to solve all these real-world issues? So what is it in specific, in general, and probably in specific, is, for example, open data or the Gaia-X approach helpful in these cases?
So, first of all, I concur that blockchain technology is already there. It's not something that we are talking about theoretically. For many use cases, blockchain technology is already mature for the market. I think the regulatory point is a very valid one. A lot of the secondary legislation we have that affects the data economy has been written with databases, central databases in mind, and they just don't fit very well. So this is high up on our agenda. We have done a study on this issue. We have tasked a number of experts to look into it. We're working with the European Data Protection Board also on issuing guidelines. These are important issues that need to be solved. I would like to add interoperability, because this is something that is a very important issue from a pan-European perspective. A lot of the solutions that we hear today from the German car industry are solutions that are first developed in-house, and then they scale potentially to another German company, but they should scale immediately. Pan-European, ideally also worldwide. So what we're doing here as European Commission is that we're trying to build stakeholder fora, and we're trying to bring the ecosystems together beyond the national borders. We have created a European blockchain partnership of the 27 EU member states that brings together blockchain experts at the governmental level. We have created the International Association for Trusted Blockchain Applications, which is the industry. And we have our think tank, which brings together academia, the European Blockchain Observatory and Forum. And we try together to leverage all these experts to address interoperability issues. One of the things, and then I stop, is that potentially to overcome the regulatory issues is because we are very careful and mindful not to regulate too quickly, not to change laws too quickly, because you can do more harm than good. So one solution that we are thinking of at the moment is a sandboxing initiative, where we could take some of the most successful and some of the more mature solutions and look at them as they scale up and solve the problems as they arise.
Really a huge question, but maybe come down to Gaia-X at first. So for those who haven't heard about Gaia-X right now, it's an initiative taken by the federal government of Germany at the previous digital summit in Dortmund at the end of November. The idea is not to copy hyperscalers or large storage, data storage companies, but to create maybe something like the next level of that. The idea is to, in a way, organize rules for an ecosystem that can further thrive in the data economy. And that makes it necessary that, of course, market actors have to be involved, legal experts, economic experts, technical experts. We see our role as a ministry or as a government as someone who gives an impulse and who moderates, but the basic idea is that whatever comes out is run by market actors, and the product should be market relevant. And we think that the ministry or government is not the better entrepreneur than a real company. And we are pushing the initiative, and we're really trying to set up a first demonstrator at the Hanover Fair in April. So there are a lot of work streams combined with Gaia-X. The idea is, as I already mentioned, to have something like an ecosystem. So data storage, data processing, hyperscaling will be a large element, but also data analytics. We really want to create an ecosystem, an opportunity also for startups to provide their services to SME companies, to large companies, whichever company needs data analytics, data storage. And we think that if we organize this ecosystem, it could be something like the internet, that with a protocol manage to interconnect different kinds of networks, autonomous systems. But with the IP, with the internet protocol, there was a layer of interoperability. So this maybe gives something like an imagination what we're talking about. So we want to have this middle layer for storage, processing, but also for companies that have data that want the data to be processed, to be analyzed. And that, of course, comes down to data. And we think that blockchain technologies give a great opportunity for companies and for consumers to enable them, and maybe also to empower them to decide on their own which data they want to provide or to share, and under which conditions. I mean, of course, we have regulation on the European level with the General Data Protection Regulation. We also have first legislation on non-personal data with the free flow of data regulation. But I mean, that's legislation. What we need is really initiatives and companies willing to generate more data and to share the data. But maybe we can go into that more.
Yeah, exactly.
We think that blockchain is really an enabling technology.
Okay.
One word to add, I think this is an extremely important initiative and which we see very favorably. We will also announce initiatives that at a pan-European level that will go a step further. I think in order to safeguard Europe's sovereignty, data sovereignty and technological sovereignty, we have to match very deep data pools in USA, in China, which facilitate machine learning. And for us to stay up to the level of competition, we need to bring these different data pools together. That can be done by pooling them on one cloud. It can also be done by using federated machine learning and blockchain to train algorithms in different pools that stay separate. So I think we should be open to solutions that can be innovative and different than just pooling all the data. We have to look at everything.
Interesting wise, Andreas just mentioned that probably even before speaking that maybe market should regulate itself in some kinds of ways, but these are initiatives from the state. So I will probably go now to the industry part over here to Car Trust. and ask over there, number one, why is this initiative not coming from industry? What do you guess from Car Trust? And the second one related to this one is, it's for me interesting whilst reading that Car Trust is from the Kroschke Group, traditional medium-sized enterprise in Germany. Normally, the medium-sized enterprises are very well known that they invest into technology which is normally legally certain, cost and ROI driven. Blockchain isn't very well known actually for being very cheap instead of probably centralized solution, or is it a different way? So what had been then the idea of thinking of these kind of initiatives, and B, what had been the specific reason for medium-sized enterprises focusing so hardly into blockchain technology in new mobility?
Maybe it's important to understand what our main business is currently. So we have 3 types of business right now at the Kroschke Group, and 2 of them I think are relevant for the use case of Car Trust. So we're one of the biggest registration service providers for vehicles in Germany. So our customers like fleet management companies or car rental services or even financial banks, they store the vehicle documents on our storage. That's the main first part. So and then we offer the service to register their vehicles in Germany. So what we're doing is we're processing a really analogous process right now. Because we're going to the registration offices with all the documents of the vehicles, and then we're doing the process for our customers, bringing back the license plates as well as those vehicle registration documents. And for sure everybody knows that this is an ending business somewhere. No one knows when exactly. So that's why we were asking ourselves, okay, what is the future about? And then we're thinking about, okay, we have 2 types of options here right now, following the approach we're doing right now and just make it digital, or thinking in a digital manner. So, and that's what we did so far. And then it turned out that, and that's what I said from the beginning, everything is based on identities. And we have the proof of the identity stored in our storage. So we know what the vehicle is, so which vehicles are available in Germany. We know what the current holder is of the vehicle, so we know who has the authorization for acting on behalf of this vehicle. And this comes to the point where I said, okay, then we need something like a vehicle register. And there it comes blockchain in our mind, because this definitely fits. And blockchain also enables us then to offer those services, like bringing the trust of who owns the vehicle right now, who has the authorization to act on behalf of the vehicle. And it offers us the perspective to offer this service to other customer segments which are right now not on our list. So if you like to, I don't know, for example, if you want to go to anybody holding vehicle data, in this case, it's, from my perspective, it's not right to ask you for your identity. You also have to ask if you're allowed to take a look into those data sets. And this is where we are coming in, because we know that you're the holder of the car and then you're allowed to do this, for example, just one small business.
Which is a very interesting link then to Gaia X, for example. If you would imagine that all the state-owned data would be also present on Gaia X, then you would also work on the Gaia X platform.
Absolutely, or we have other things like Gov Digital, or which is just founded in December last year, and this is also a nice idea of creating creating infrastructure on behalf of the government in this case, and where those data sets can be available for us as well, for the private sector.
So you mentioned, sorry.
Just to quickly add, so we actually share the requirement that, of course, also state generated or owned data, of course, taking into account legal requirements, should be placed onto Gaia X. So we are already in discussions with other relevant ministries, what they think about the idea, and to us it's very clear that that's crucial for the success of Gaia X.
So probably, if I understood right, it's crucial that, for example, state is the role model in using the infrastructure at first, for example, in the case of open data?
Yeah, I think so. So, as a user of technologies, so we're not only talking about blockchain, but of course also providing data, maybe also using services in the Gaia-X ecosystem. But I think when we talk about data availability, we think that what the state can really manage or change is to be more open with government data. So, I mean, when you want to lead, you have to, the best way to lead is to lead by an example. So,
Irina, a very good point. You want to reply, and then I have a question for you as well.
Okay, then I'm keeping the mic. To tie this all together, I think it's also important to consider, which I think is intrinsically, people are aware of that, but maybe not as explicitly, is that the interesting thing about DLT is that that's both an infrastructure layer, which is why it's so important for regulators and governments to be involved from the start, but it's also an application layer which the industry is hopefully going to use and adapt to. And the interesting thing is, Lucas has mentioned this, that there has been enough analysis about so-called industrial ages, and that with DLT we are basically transitioning into a new one. And if we think back about our school education about the 20th century, that when oil came along, the entire industry was propelled forward, and it was the job of regulators and nations and industry associations to come together to make sure that transport routes were safe, that there was standard of refinement, that their trade law was basically updated to reflect a new international system and economy that needed basically oil to move the entire economy and the societies built on top of them. And now if we are all becoming more and more aware, as did native citizens of the internet, that the new century and the new industrial age is going to be powered and based on an economy of data sharing, then of course the next question is, how do we make that data secure? How do we make sure that there's a standard? We are moving into the age of fake news and deepfakes and everything. How to make sure it's trustworthy? How to make sure that we are reliable towards each other? Whether there is bad faith intent or whether there's just like human error involved? How we make sure that our entire societies, now transitioning into a digital age, have an infrastructure that actually holds up to the promise and the potential we see as society. And that is where I think a lot of us got excited about DLT, to say that, okay, it's not basically the be-all and end-all, but it's a foundation that we can start building on top of. And that is where I go into the IoT part, and then mobility happens.
But should the standardization in this case come from industry, or does it come from state actors?
Where does standardization ever come from? It's an ongoing dialogue and conversation, and I think it's also, excuse the slightly overdramatic term, but a sign of maturity in our societies and our dialogues, that where a century ago it was really a battle from a very top-down approach from politics and a very rebellious industry trying to make a change. Nowadays, I think all of us had conversations. There's ongoing dialogue at INATBA, there's ongoing dialogue with the academic ecosystem. And I think right now the question isn't so much who is driving it. I think we are passing the baton along and back and forth amongst each other. So at the moment we are still in a very happy place of harmonious, let's move forward. I'm sure the competition will come in eventually and is starting to, but yes.
But then against the background of your membership of INATBA, where's now the point why it's not going, or what's coming next then? What is now the next thing? So what is it now? What's missing? What's limiting that everyone says, okay, blockchain is standard, so next one?
Okay, there are a couple of, if it's okay, I'll pass the mic around after this one. The interesting thing with INATBA and others is that so there's always this question about maturity and maturation of the technology. What needs to be kept in mind, this technology is 8 years old, and the standarding setting is like an effort of 5 years. So according to its age, it's super mature. When compared to the established car industry or oil industry, we are just basically in infancy. And so what is coming is that the dialogue is now, I think, set. So the first couple of years was, we all remember this Bitcoin. That was a scary thing nobody knew, and it became more and more people public knowledge. And so this question of, is this relevant and is this here to stay? I think that phase is covered. And now, as you mentioned, it's a question of standardization, and that is really, we are doing our homework right now. And so for the past 3 years, the industry was pushing regulators to do their homework. Now we have data strategies, we have the federal government's blockchain strategy, and now it's the industry's turn to do their homework, to say, okay, our use cases are getting more sophisticated, we are coming along with the MoCo standard, for example, identification units, APIs, and everything that is connected to the yeah, it's less exciting until you are done, but right now we are basically on our labs and doing the research.
But then a specific question, Andreas, what's the homework of Markus to do? What's the specific use area, the homework? So what is now from a German perspective, for example, from a German industry, the question, and from a European perspective, Lucas, from you as well. So what's the homework industry has to do now?
Now, look, I'm representing a ministry. If I were the better entrepreneur, I wouldn't sit here on this chair, maybe on that chair. So, I mean, I think you have to have an idea, but maybe I think what maybe is very relevant also when we elaborated the blockchain strategy. There were many considerations and thoughts. Why do you want to push blockchain? And now, sorry for pouring water in the wine you're drinking, and I went like, well, we are not pushing blockchain, we're trying to set a level playing field for blockchain. We're trying to set a level playing field for decentralized federated systems in a platform economy, in a platform-driven economy, so that's all. We're just trying to set a level playing field. But of course, the real market test, if blockchain is the more efficient technology compared to other technologies, or if a decentralized system, trust the protocol, is a more efficient system than a platform, intermediated system, that's not the job of a government to decide, at least not in the Western parts of the world. So, and this is why I would say, hey, you need us, tell us what we can do. What's the job of the government? What are the options for the government and for policymakers to decide on? But we cannot do more, sorry, but that's enough.
I'll be as cautious, and I didn't say at the beginning that everything I say doesn't bind the European Commission. I stick out my head a little bit. So first of all, I would like to fully concur with Andreas that it's not the job of governmental officials to set standards. I think this is for the industry. Standard setting has to come bottom up. But I think where we come in, we can point to certain areas where we see a lack of standards. And I think then give the industry a little nudge and financial support if it's necessary and the right framework to move. And I think the one thing that we need to solve is the interoperability between blockchains. So we have a lot of different enterprise blockchains that have been created for specific use cases and they don't talk to one another. Smart contracts are not yet interoperable. We're talking about a standard now for the mobility sector, for identity and for insurance, and that's great. But will that standard work with the financial industry that's developing its standards in parallel? Will a token that's being earned with driving in an environmental friendly way be a token I can transfer to my digital wallet outside the mobile ecosystem? ? These are interoperability questions which the industry will have to solve. I would just like to say one thing and then I'll stop. We are in a different environment today than we were when the internet was built. When the internet was built, it was already questionable whether software can be patented at all. So that was the background to DARPA, that was the background to the reason we had a lot of open source and very open standards for the internet. Today, we're in a very different ballgame. We are in a situation where geopolitically, the large players are trying to control patenting and standards using patents for controlling standards. So one large Chinese company has filed for 8,000 patents in blockchain over the last 5 years. 8,000 patents of one Chinese company. One of them being to patent the right to roll out a domain name system in blockchain. This is happening while we speak. So I think Europe can't just sit back and say, let's wait until things are done, because they will be done by others. So we need to be very careful. The standards are needed, interoperability is needed, the industry will have to get its act together, but we stand ready to help.
Before we coming back to industry, I just want to give also Florian the chance in having an opinion in this one. And I wrote an interesting quote yesterday. I have to read: as the world urbanizes, developing efficient transportation systems will be critical. To meet the challenge, policymakers will need to develop new skills and mindsets. So my first question when I was only reading this one, how? And what does it mean specific?
Yeah, good question. Obviously, I'm here as a representative and president of Bundesblock, the German Blockchain Association, and we're right in the middle between industry and regulators, and we try to be a facilitator between these two groups. And one, I think, interesting clue to an answer to your question is what we've done last year, which is what we called a papathon, which was really a very simple idea to bring both government and industry officials together to have them